Today we're talking about ethics. And for some of you licensed in other states, to renew your engineering licensure, it requires that you have some ongoing ethical training. And I think my reaction is the same as everyone else's reaction, is in terms of, well, I'm already the good person. I see movies, I know what the villain looks like. I'm not the villain, I'm not the bad guy. Why, in order to just renew my license to keep doing what I'm always doing, why do I need to get ethical training? And my thoughts on that, after having been in this particular spot, and I'll talk about that in a second, is that the point is they want to foster boards and various committees want to foster a discussion and to make sure that you as an individual do not shy away from pursuing knowledge of ethics or having open conversations regarding ethics in your workplace. Frequently, these conversations come about by introducing a challenge and then having an office environment where we're open to discussion to resolve those ethical issues. Because ethical issues are situational and contextual and time dependent and also dynamic in any one given situation. And so for some of you who might be looking at this saying, well, what elevates Peter Marxhausen to being able to talk about ethics? And the answer is nothing. I am the exact same as everyone that's in attendance today. My undergraduate work is at CSU and my graduate work is at CU, and I am just an engineer day in, day out. But I find myself here today, not because I have elevated ethics or any type of moral superiority. Is about 15 years ago, I was asked to start teaching senior design at University of Colorado, Denver, which I have done for the last 15 years. And as part of senior design course, I was asked to introduce a part of that class about ethics. So I did, and I had to do some research that I think would not necessarily be part of a normal engineer's duties, and start to research ethics and put together a program for ethics. And over the course of 15 years, a person in my position gets bombarded by students, all meaning well, to ask questions to fully discover and explore the bounds of ethical behavior and the bounds of legal behavior. And I found myself over the course of my career having to do far more research in the realm of ethics than I think a conventional engineer would typically have to do. At least I would hope so, that you're not running into these situations on such a regular basis. And which gets me to the next step. Is about 5-6 years ago, the Structural Engineers Association of Colorado was looking to fill the Ethics and Legislative Committee, realizing that as part of my regular duties, I was probably researching laws and ethics more than a conventional engineer. I raised my hand and said, I'll take that. And so I find myself chairing the Ethics and Legislative Committee for SEAC. And as part of that, I put together this presentation, which was delivered to the Structural Engineers Association of Colorado about a year ago. And so it is just simply a download of amount of data that I have to share with you with respect to laws and ethics, and I'll talk in a second about why those two are tied together. So ethics, by forcing you or asking you to take ethical conversations, no one is implying that you are unethical. Certainly not. You are all the good person. You're out there designing infrastructure for the public, but it is definitely a topic that merits conversation. So a little bit of background. What is the definition of ethics? Engineering ethics is the field of applied ethics, which examines and sets standards for engineers' obligations, of course, to the public, to their clients, to their employers, and the profession itself. And ethics is not necessarily a standard of how they are. Ethics is always the goal on how they should be. Well, what does that mean? That means how should we act to the public? How should we act to clients? How should we act to each other? And back up a little bit. How should we act to each other? And it is a compass, a direction. It is not always black and white. Ethics versus morals. Well, morals can be held individually. Ethics are a group, and then laws at the other end are legally enforceable. So the progression of values, if we say morals, let's give an example of professional morals. Well, let's say we as a company collectively offer every employee 5 weeks paid vacation and 6 months of paid maternity leave. That's not ethically required. That's not legally required. That is your culture as a company, or maybe it's your culture as an individual employer, or your culture as a manager. That is a personally held belief, which we consider to be morals. If we elevate it to say we collectively agree as a society or as a group or as a profession, something, then it elevates it to ethics. For example, professionally, participation in professional societies like you're doing right now. Participation in ASCE is ethically required. It is one of the ethical canons held by both National Society of Professional Engineers and the American Society of Civil Engineers. When we participate in professional societies, it elevates the profession, making it better for all of us as a professional and also for the public. We all agree, but it's not legally required. If you didn't attend my meeting today, there's no policeman that's going to knock on your door and arrest you. It's not a law. A law, for example, is a person must pass a state-issued exam to be a professional engineer. And again, keeping that in the context of what we do as civil engineers, I cannot hold myself out to be a PE unless I've passed the professional engineering examination issued by the state of Colorado. And to that extent, I can't call myself a PE in another state until I've passed their examinations, or at least their application process. Let me give you a little bit more of a non-specific. These are the elevation of values, morals, ethics, laws, as it pertains to our profession. In the generic, if you choose to be a vegan, that is your moral choice. Maybe you want to be a vegetarian, which means maybe you're going to eat eggs and drink milk. Well, that's a vegetarian, and that's okay. You're not wrong by being a vegan or a vegetarian. That is your moral held belief. And that does not obligate everyone else to follow exactly what you're doing. Maybe some people want to add in, well, they're kind of vegetarian, but they add in fish and they're a pescatarian, or add in chicken. Still morally held beliefs. But at some point, we can collectively agree on what we should and should not eat. For example, if you're saying, well, our family pet died, our family hamster died, or cat or dog died, or a rabbit died, and we're eating it for dinner. That has a collective ew factor. That feels collectively wrong. Ethically, we can all agree from all walks of life, from all cultures, that's not acceptable. That's unethical to eat your own family pet. But it may not be illegal. In fact, I'd argue it's not illegal. On the far end, what if we say for dinner we're having another human being? That's now illegal. That exceeds morals, that exceeds ethics. That is illegal to eat another human being altogether. And so it has escalated that it's beyond ethics. We could go to jail for not following along with that. And so where we sit on how we should act as professionals, as a company, is directed by that compass of, well, this is just our morally held belief. Is this what we should ethically do because that is the culture of civil engineering? Or are we legally obligated to do that? Situational, as I talked before, ethics and morals and laws can be situational, contextual, time-dependent, and dynamic. And the guidance that is out there can be given to us by the American Society of Civil Engineers, NSPE, the National Council of Structural Engineers Association, and there's also state law guidance in each one of the 56 licensing jurisdictions. If you feel my presentation doesn't cover it all, I would encourage you to look up some of these code of ethics and ethical canons. Next point. We would generally consider by the examples that I just gave you that it's a linear progression. We have morals, and then eventually it's ethics, and then it's laws, and it's just a simple linear function. But what if I were to tell you it's really an XY plot that we can have 4 quadrants: legal and ethical, legal and unethical, illegal and unethical, and illegal and ethical? And that seems a little bit counterintuitive, because you'd say, well, wait a minute, if it's If it's ethical, it's got to be legal. And if it's illegal, it's got to be unethical. It can only be one or the other. Let's talk about some examples. Let's start off with legal and ethical. Designing infrastructure, being a civil engineer. That's not unethical or illegal. Of course, that is acceptable. And that's where the quadrant of all this that we all hope to sit because it's non-controversial. How about legal but unethical? What if I were to give this presentation just dropping F-bombs and calling people MFers or wasn't wearing a shirt? I was sitting here naked. Okay, I didn't do anything illegal, but that's unprofessional. That's unbecoming for our profession, our collective profession as civil engineers. And so that becomes unethical. We have an ethical obligation under NSPE and ASCE to promote the profession. And the behavior that I just described hypothetically would be in a counter position to that. Therefore, it's unethical, but still legal. All right, the next one's easy. Illegal and unethical. If I go out and steal a car or steal a bike, clearly unethical, clearly illegal, very easy to define. How about illegal, but still ethical? I ran into the situation before. I can give you an example, and my example here is parking in a handicapped stall while bringing an injured person to the hospital. Clearly illegal. I can get a ticket and a summons to court, but ethically is the right thing. And this, I actually found myself in this position, which is why I use this. My son, when he was 10 years old, the same one at the middle school track race, he was chasing a rabbit in the backyard, walked across a window well. The window well broke under him and he fell into the window well, and the window well cover broke apart that it cut him from his ankle all the way up to his crotch, about an inch to an inch and a half deep, going into the muscle. Screaming, I pull him out. He's filleted open like a fish. I grab towels around him, get my wife. We get in the car. There's no way I can even wait for an ambulance. We tear off to Littleton Hospital. When I get to Littleton Hospital, there's an ambulance blocking the emergency exit. I don't care. This is my son. He's bleeding in the back seat. I pull way up on the sidewalk, block everyone else's entrance. Security person comes out. Sir, you can't park there. I open the back door, grab my kid out, show him the towel or unwrap the towel, show the blood that's dripping out, the huge cut, and the security guard goes, do whatever you want. We'll figure out the car later. Come right inside. Urgent. Hits the button, and we come right in, right? Still illegal parking, definitely, but not unethical. And so we can play these games upon where we exist. Strategies for ethical behavior. Create a company culture for ethical behavior. And what is that? Simply holding this in your mind, saying, well, we're ethical and we're always ethical, doesn't really get you across the finish line. You need to have a willingness to discuss ethical situations as a group, as a team, and as a company. If you as a manager are making decisions that you believe are ethical in nature, share that with the staff. Help educate them that when you have a situation that maybe you could either make more money and have an unethical decision, or make less money, but it's the ethical decision, don't make that in secrecy. Share that. Talk about that. This is who we are as a company. We're going to forego potential money or expansion or growth because culturally we are an ethical company. And that's how you do it. And discuss it. And don't say that this is absolute. Does anyone else have another idea? Or can they interject something that maybe we hadn't thought of? And the willingness to talk about ethical issues is part of that culture. Understanding your ethical responsibilities as an individual, as a civil engineer, at least being familiar with the 7 canons. I should take that back. There's 8 canons now of the American Society of Civil Engineers. Communicate and discuss, because you discuss or talk about ethical situations with a coworker, with a manager, with an owner, does not make you unethical. I frequently find myself in a position where I have a situation and I feel it best to just get it out if I go talk to somebody else that I have a respect for and say, here's the situation, I got A and I got B and I'm not really sure what to do. And typically, just by saying it out loud to a neutral person, I know what I need to do, but I've always had the benefit of a culture at a company where we're willing to have those conversations, that the person who's listening to me isn't thinking, wow, Peter Marxhausen is really unethical because he has to ask a question. We always need to be willing to have the conversation. And in civil engineers, how do we get to resolution? Because generally there's multiple paths that we can go to. List the options. I can do A, B, C, D, E. Test those options. If I do A, or if I do B, or if I do C, or if I do D, what is the likely outcome? Make the decision. This is the direction we want to go. We are an ethical company. Collectively, this is the direction we want to go. And then act. Failure to act negates everything else. A, B, and C really don't matter unless you do something about it. So let's get into the quiz. Hopefully you printed this at this point. Nicole asked a question out there. Where do you work? I'm assuming that's directed for me. I work for Unified Building Sciences and Engineering. This is technically my sister company. I work for UBSE. I also work as a professor at CU Denver. I also work for the Denver Building Department, and I also have my own consulting company for new construction. So we're about 2 slides away from getting to some questions. Aren't engineers only governed by physics? When I graduated from CSU, I simply thought that the realm of physics was the only thing that applied to me and the practice of my work. Just follow the code, follow the ASCE code or the ACI code, and all will be okay. It was a harsh reality when I found out that there's a whole host of laws on the books that are not simply codes, but they're regulations in terms of how engineers need to act. Roughly 86 pages at the time, and I started researching that. So the answer is no. Do we only have to abide by physics as engineers? There's a little bit more. We have 50 states and 56 licensing jurisdictions. All 50 states have laws on the book. In Colorado, it's called the Colorado Revised Statutes. Whenever you see the abbreviation C.R.S., that means the Colorado Revised Statutes. It could simply say statutes or maybe Colorado statutes, but I think to convey that they are dynamic and changing, they're called their Colorado Revised Statutes. And in Colorado, there's essentially a set of encyclopedias. It's 44 books long, starting off with elections, ending in regulation activities. Title 12 is professions and occupations. If I pull book number 12 off the shelf and open it up, it's going to talk about professions and occupations. 8 years ago, virtually every profession was included in Title 12. For example, acupuncture, family therapists, athletic trainers, outfitters, physical therapists, barbers, cosmetologists, architects, land surveyors, pharmacists, plumbing, electricians rather. Everything was in there. And in the last 5 years, they've started spinning it off. And if I take 12 off the shelf, open it up, this is where I'm at. Pretty much accountants, barbers, electricians, engineers, surveyors, and architects. And then we have a whole bunch of medical professionals. There's a whole bunch of other professions that are regulated in Colorado that no longer are within Title 12. They've been spun off. For example, if I go to, I had some notes here. What did I have here? If I go to Title 29, firearms dealers is now under that section, and pawnbrokers is elsewhere, still regulated. We as engineers are definitely concerned about Title 12, and within there's essentially 37 remaining articles that describe the practice. So if I take Article 120 off the shelf, it's going to offer their new regulations, and they have been revised as of late. In August 2020, October 2019, September 2019, June of 2019, May of 2019, March of 2017, and September of 2015, there's been a fair amount of changes. I will tell you everything that I'm talking to you today is consistent with the last revision, which is August 2020, and they have significantly shaken things up. Article 120 has been revised in terms of numerical organization, but everything is still there. And then Colorado Code of Regulations with respect to the laws and bylaws, completely. It's like I took all the rules in there, shook it up, and then redumped it out. They completely restructured it, but same thing. Most all this stuff is there. It was kind of like the transition between the 1997 Uniform Building Code and the 2000 International Building Code. Virtually everything made it through. It just ended up in different chapters and different contexts and was worded slightly, but still the heart is there. So if you are familiar perhaps with the laws of 10 years ago and you feel really good about it, they're there, but it's going to take you a little bit of time to potentially find it because it's been restructured. All right, violations in Texas. I only have statistics for Texas. Texas has 59,000 licensed PEs approximately. On an annual basis, they open about 750 cases, and using their statistics, about 70% are resolved with voluntary compliance. Usually it's the board reminding them, saying you need to do this, or you need to renew your license, something that's fairly innate and mundane. 12% are outright dismissed. There's somebody files a complaint because they're mad, outright gets dismissed, and then everything in between there. About 18%, there's some level of investigation, and of course, you should know as a licensed professional, they can suspend your license, they can revoke your license, they can issue a fine, they can mandate continuing education credits, they can suspend license, fine. Oh, a letter of admonition can go in your permanent file. You can go onto state of Colorado, DORA, and look up any one licensed professional and see if they have disciplinary action filed against them. I had some experience with this. Unfortunately, back in March, I was appointed by the courts to act as an arbitrator. I didn't actually apply for this at all. I didn't even know about it until I got a handing from a court to say I was going to act as an arbitration in a case between two entities, acting essentially as a judge, listened to both sides. I entered a ruling. The losing party was not happy that they had lost, and so they logged onto DORA, found my name, says all you got to do is hit a button that says file a complaint. The complaint was simply, Mr. Marxhausen has no ethics whatsoever. And in that one sentence, there was technically 3 spelling and grammar errors, but doesn't matter. DORA has to open up a case against me. Takes about 6 weeks to get through, goes to the board. You get a chance to respond. I simply said, look, I wasn't even acting as an engineer. It wasn't even through my company. I was appointed by a court to act as an arbitrator. Here's everything I did. Here's my ruling. Here's all the paperwork that I considered. And I fall into that case. It was dismissed, fortunately. You still lose sleep. It's still stressful. All right.